We're here for episode 3 of Lessons from the Sidelines. This week's guest is Jason Kuhn. Jason's a former Navy SEAL, former college baseball pitcher. He turned to his faith before becoming a SEAL, and now he's forged in this new part of his life as a coach. In this episode, he takes us through the strategies he lived playing from the playing field to the battlefield, and now how we can make these same strategies a part of our daily lives. You can learn more about Jason at Jason Kuhn Performance. Search Jason Kuhn on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and other social media platforms. We appreciate your support here at Lessons from the Sidelines and Great Days Leadership. And you can show that support by subscribing or following the podcast. Enjoy today's Lessons from the Sidelines with Jason Kuhn. But hey, I'm really excited. I appreciate it. I know you're swamped time-wise and everything, but you're one of the first people I thought about getting on here when I got out of coaching and we started this podcast and this working a leadership consulting firm here. So it's awesome what we're doing, and just to be able to pick your brains a little bit will be a lot of fun for me.
Well, I'm happy to be here and appreciate you asking, and it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I think that was 11 years ago, the first time that we were together there.
Yeah, it's been a minute. You were within the first 10 schools, I think, to bring me in and trust me to work with your team, I think. So
Well, we do. And that's, we'll talk about that arc a little bit too. I wanted to start off with this. I was going through some of my notes that I had seen, that I had taken from the classroom and on the field that day. And the one that always jumps out to me, and I think it's a launching point, is my ability to control my thoughts and action regardless of circumstances sets me apart from other men. I know that's from the SEAL Creed. How does that lead what you do or take off with how you, I would assume that's where you start a lot of your leadership teaching from?
yeah, focusing on what you can affect, what you can control. That was something that wasn't really taught to me in athletics. Of course, that was a long time ago, and now the mental side and training has become much more mainstream. But yeah, that was something that was pretty profound to me. And Buds and SEAL Training Hell Week in particular, it's pretty much just constant chaos. And can you continue to have attention to detail, work a task, and work together as a team, no matter what kind of distraction they throw in with adverse circumstances, whether it's physical pain, whether it's exhaustion, sleep deprivation, you name it. It's kind of just continuous disappointment, continuous adversity, and can you continue to work the problem and work together through the problems?
So those same elements pop up in everything that we do, whether you're a C-suite executive or you're a middle school basketball coach. The unpredictability of things and leading people through those. How have you taken those skills and tried to translate those? And we'll use coaching for now, or even corporate type thing, because it's not life and death. It's important, obviously, but what you're training for is obviously life and death situation.
Yeah, it's not life and death, but the outcomes do matter. It's success and failure, and there are consequences for that. And I think that combat eliminates the clutter because when bullets start flying in both directions, a way of acting, thinking, or interacting with your teammate is either effective or it's not. And taking that same sort of tactical approach to different competitive environments produces the same results because I think the principles that lead to winning and success are universal, regardless of what competitive environment you find yourself in. In sports, it's winning and losing. In the corporate world, it's revenue and sales and building the business. And in combat, yeah, it's life and death. But adversity is adversity. When you meet circumstances that are outside of your control, unfair, disappointing, our nervous system and our minds, they respond the same way. And the way we choose to respond to them is also the same. It can be effective or ineffective if we focus on fear, if we focus on what could go wrong, if we focus on everything that happened that shouldn't have to lead up to this point. It does not produce elite performance. But if we focus on what we can affect, trust the preparation, so on and so forth, focus on our teammates over ourselves, our fear reduces. It's all universal. It all applies. It's just a different environment.
Different. Well, on that note of adversity with you playing Division I baseball at MTSU, I think that adversity has gotten you to where you are today. And I know that's a simplified way of that, but do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I've had a pretty hard life. A lot of it behind the scenes, things that people don't know about. And it's definitely made me more resilient. sometimes I ask myself, God, what lesson do I need to learn this time? You know, but in
Should
college,
we spare a couple of lessons? Yeah.
yeah, I so in college I was an average pitcher. In fact, I was recruited as a utility player. I didn't really even care to pitch that much in college, and I could throw really hard from the outfield and long toss, but I couldn't translate that on the mound. It was mechanics and just I didn't have the knowledge base that I needed to be able to do that. But our coach wanted me to pitch, and I struggled. So I was an average college pitcher. I became an above average college pitcher, and then there was a short window of about 6 months where I started to dominate. In fact, in college summer league up in the Northwoods League, the one of the best outings I ever had, I struck out 9 in 3 innings. Nobody even fouled a pitch off. And so my potential to play professionally was starting to show. I needed to put the consistency together, but I was climbing and cruising and on my way there. And then I woke up one day and couldn't throw a baseball. And it was due to the yips, which is part of what I do now is helping people overcome that. But at the time there was no name for it. I had no idea what was going on. And people attributed it to mental weakness. You can't handle the pressure, which is not the case with the yips at all. It's a different thing, but that's for a different podcast. But not knowing why I couldn't make my arm work properly and why I couldn't throw a strike when I'm so close to the draft, I can smell it and taste it, really hurt. And it broke me down because my identity was centered in baseball. And I was pretty lost when that happened. But through prayer, reflection, and looking internal to learn some things about myself that I needed to learn and forge, made it through SEAL training, and I think it helped me. Could I have made it through without having gone through that? I don't know. I think I'd like to think that I could, but it certainly helped. And I think those are the kind of guys who get through the training are the ones who are driven by meaningful purpose, who really want to do the job, and it's not their first rodeo when it comes to experiencing adverse
Tough
circumstances.
things.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, one of the things when I got out of coaching on the floor and into this role was like, if I knew then what I know now, and that's where I want to start serving from, because I do think there's some value to experience, both good and bad, things I would have done, continue to do that we did well and continue to do, and things that we didn't do well with that. If you knew then as a pitcher what you know now, what would be different? How would there be a different approach to it?
Yeah, I would say having more of an internal conviction and belief in self and in my own self-worth than a need of external validation. I had a deep need of affirmation from people and entities that I viewed as peers, whether it be a coach or being able to say that I played professional baseball and the draft, and having my identity really grounded in knowing who I am, what I wanted, what my mission is, and why I wanted it, the meaningful purpose that drives me forward, rather than having our self-worth dictated in success in the game, allow our intrinsic sense of self-worth to create the success in the game or the profession. And that was something that I learned through that dark and difficult time in the implosion in baseball. Once I stopped drinking and got myself together and started a direction forward, and I looked internal to figure out, because there was a lot of things that happened that were very unfair, that were very difficult and dark on and off of the field. But we still have to look at ourselves and say, what could I have done differently? And what parts of me need to die, and what parts of me are strong and need to continue to be strengthened. And that was it. I was a really shy, nervous, anxious kid, but I could excel in baseball. And social acceptance was difficult for me when I was young, and baseball was an avenue for that. And I also just really loved baseball. I mean, I loved it more than people. There's nowhere I would rather be than on the baseball field playing or practicing it. So I was desperate to hold on to that. And a lot of my identity got centered into it. So having an identity that would be more grounded. And what I tell kids and players and coaches and anyone is, particularly younger players, because they don't have a lot of life experience yet. It's like, where else do I find value in myself? I haven't really done anything yet. And they say, well, I believe we're all perfectly made in God's image. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, but they don't define us. We're forged by Him. And through those experiences are how we learn, grow, and get better.
Well, I think, because I'm just thinking personally, as you say that, always guilty when I was playing sports growing up, or even as a coach, of your identity being wrapped up into that. Because when somebody asks you a question, it becomes back, well, what do you do? And it's easy for me as a coach to confuse what I do with who I am. and I know I felt different one way the day after winning a ball game and the day after losing a ball game, that self-worth. How have you said it was sometimes you would speak to younger athletes or some who didn't have as much experience. What about older people who do have the experiences and maybe even more entrenched in that identity?
Yeah, it's I think that it's a balance, right? So it's not like one or the other and it doesn't matter what you do or apathy or something like that. It's a balance. What I essentially developed a codependent relationship with baseball. And I think it's that word dependency. Am I dependent on this for my sense of self-worth, or do I value it as a part of my sense of self-worth because of the things that I've done, the work that I've put in, the dedication and discipline has created this sort of success that I'm experiencing, and placing that value in those foundational things that create the success more so than what actually happens. But yeah, it feels good. And when we win and we compete and we succeed and dominate, we should, because the outcome matters and it should feel good and you should feel proud of that. And
But
it's
you're not. What you're saying is you're not dependent on that.
correct. And learning
Yeah.
that lesson early on was very valuable for me when I went into the SEAL teams, because you see Navy SEALs who come in when they're young and get out 30 years later and really struggle with their sense of identity after the job. I knew that I could walk away from it at any point and still feel grounded in who I was. And I think that gave me a lot of freedom to be able to succeed in special operations. I wasn't the best Navy SEAL ever by any means. There's guys who went on to higher tiers levels and did twice as much time in the military that I did, but I did do well. And I think having that identity centered and grounded and that freedom was part of, because I wasn't bigger, faster, stronger, and certainly not smarter than most of the other guys. But having learned that lesson early on reduced a lot of, you're always being evaluated. You're just never not being watched, evaluated, or tested on something. So it's stressful. And that helped me be able to compete within that stress well.
Let me ask you this: you had let me find the quote right here. You said that failure can't take our purpose. Can you? Because a lot of times I think whether you're when there is failure, you feel like there's no hope, and if there's no hope, then there's no motivation at that point. Can you jump on that just a little bit?
Yeah, with failure, it's hard for me to go. I failed so many times that it's hard for me to go back to when I used to view it as more of a limiting thing, and now I don't know. I hate it. I talk about process and learning from failure and all of this. It's not this soft approach. I hate failure. I love to win. I'm coming at you when we compete. I'm going to take everything from you if I can when we go head to head. However, viewing failure tactically, it's understanding that we can't force the outcome. We can't control it. If we could, then you would win and so would I if we competed against each other. We can only influence it. So our aim should be to influence it to the greatest degree possible. And so having that understanding, I think more philosophically, is the idea. And when we do fail, is to not waste your pain. It's going to hurt and it's going to hurt bad. So allow that pain to motivate you to learn, grow, and get better. But a lot of times, Greg, you'll see people, coaches says, "Hey, let's learn from it and move on," but the how isn't really in there. And so some of the things I get into is, well, let's what we would do is you come into a room after, if there's a failed mission and ego and rank are checked at the door, and you start breaking it down, and it's identifying controllable corrections, or what I call fundamental inconsistencies, not only in action but also in mindset and interaction with each other and our culture. And then identifying weaknesses. What are some uncontrollable disadvantages that we may be facing? In the corporate world, your competitor may have more resources in terms of revenue or relationships or something like that that you have to work around. So you can use start, stop, continue drills. You can identify workarounds in those categories where your opponent may have some power over you that you do not have. And then the third part, and this is the hardest one for high achievers and A-type competitors, is forgiving yourself. So eyes up, next target. And going through that process improvement structure helps you make that shift forward, because now you have something to apply for the next time. You have a plan rather than, well, I'm going to learn from it and hope it gets better next time, right?
Well, and as a coach, I've seen and working with teams, seen both ends of it. That after the game, like, hey, we're going to learn from it and move on, but then no corrections are made, and sometimes no corrections are made, as you said, because the ego isn't driven out. Whether it's the coach's ego or the player's ego or whatever the corporate leader is. What are some strategic things that you're doing to help drive out that ego, help people to be more, I guess, self-aware is probably the word start.
Sure. Well, the self awareness is a big one. So, with every player or team, whether it be athletic or corporate, I start with the identity, the who, what, why. They write out a who. Who are you? What makes you uniquely you as the individual? As a team, what are the core values that we want to live each day? And I typically stick to the rule of three because you can remember three things. And I do see some leaders who are very well intended who have pages of core values and mission statement, but nobody can remember that and write out the mission. What is it that you want to accomplish? Tyler Matzek, who was out of baseball and got back with the Atlanta Braves and won the World Series, was one of my first individual professional baseball clients. And he wrote his who in a marker on his mirror, a dry erase marker, so he would see it and print it across his face each morning before he went out to train and make his way back to the big leagues because everybody said it was hopeless. There's no chance. We even had a mental skills coach from the Rockies called his agent and said that he should drop him and I should stop working with him because we were prolonging his suffering and providing him false hope. So to negate those sort of criticisms and things that you feel from the outside, he wrote it and you could see it as he goes to the field. So we do the who, what, why. Who are you? What do you want to accomplish? What's the purpose that drives you forward? A motto and a legacy that you want to leave behind. Now the identity is established, but to really reduce the ego, and ego is important. Ego is not a bad thing. Egotistical is a bad thing, but the team first mind, I think, gets presented in a self-sacrificial manner a lot of times. Hey, serve the team for the greater good because it's the right thing to do. But I have a pretty unique way, as you know, of introducing the team first concept and showing how it reduces anxiety and fear and actually helps the individual play better and accomplish the goals that they want to have. And in turn, helps the team play better. And when you break that down, particularly on the corporate level where it's harder to gain a team first buy-in, it can be pretty powerful, but people are always going to act and need to act in some capacity in their own self-interest to survive and things like that. So if you can show how a selfless team first mind is actually in their own self-interest, then you can gain buy-in and conviction from resistant members.
But it starts with you understanding well, I guess first it starts with that person understanding their why, because I would think a lot of times they haven't drilled down to that depth. And then the second part of it sounds like is you understanding what that why is. And the why can be, I would assume, because I was thinking whether it's in a corporate setting to where there are some employees who are driven to be the next CEO or to go start their own business, and other employees are, hey, I'm just going to punch a clock and get in. But both of them can aspire to be the best. I would assume they can be in that role. Is that
Correct. And then why?
accurate?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, no. Is that, if you could expand on that's probably the best way.
Yeah. So the why collectively in sports is much easier. Everybody wants to win the national title, the World Series, whatever it may be. It's very easy to identify and it's easy to gain buy in because everyone on the team wants that. In a corporate setting, it's harder. And sometimes CEOs will try to show the value in what it is that we provide for the world, and that's good. But at the end of the day, if you stop paying them, they're going to stop showing up, right? So if you can key it, so everybody's purpose as to what is motivating them to be there can be different. And that's what makes it challenging in the corporate world. But as a leader, if you can key in on what causes that individual to be there and amplify that, then you can get higher motivation and a higher level of performance. So, for instance, I know that my father, he's since passed away, but he didn't love his job, but he did grow up poor in a trailer park. And his goal was to give me and my sister a chance at a normal lifestyle. And he did. So, that was the purpose that caused him to show up. And obviously, there's some boundaries in place as you learn the personal lives of your employees and things like that. But if you can find ways to incentivize and motivate that action, whether it's through reward or praise or time off or whatever it may be, but it might be different for each person. And that's the challenging part in the corporate world.
Let me ask you this. You talked about leadership as far as the finding the why and the things. You talked before also about developing a decentralized versus a centralized leadership model. You'll hear, I think, coach a lot of times, it's a player-driven locker room or those types of things. And all coaches say that, but a lot of coaches, as you know, are micromanagers. There's a lot of micromanagers in the corporate world. Talk about the balance between centralized versus decentralized leadership.
Yeah. So in the SEAL teams, we had a very decentralized leadership structure, meaning junior members had more autonomy than you will find anywhere in the military, anywhere else in the military, at least in my experience. And I do make a separation between sports and corporation with decentralization, because for decentralization to work properly, there are elements that need to be in place. We had, for the most part, unlimited government funding. Well, in a corporate world, you're working with various levels of revenue and what you can invest back into the human element. The way that we had 20 people in a platoon, 40 in a troop, those are pretty small numbers versus 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 employees. And then the way you're going about it and what you're making. But let's go back to sports. So I think in sports, particularly in college, where at that point, you have the 7% from high school or whatever it actually is. And so you have very highly motivated individuals who want to be there, who want to get to the next level, who want to win a national championship. Decentralization there is a little bit easier than, say, a young high school kid, ranging in ages anywhere from 14 to 18 years old, and probably needs more of a centralized structure and being taught how to lead. In sports, I think it's important for player-driven leadership because players have more influence on each other than coaches do. Not authority, but influence, because they're each other's peers. And sometimes, in my experiences, kids on the team who the coaches thought were leaders or that we looked up to weren't actually that at all. And even sometimes players who didn't play that much, they were popular or they were just good dudes, and the other guys looked up to them and had a lot more influence than the coach may have realized. So if you can key in, not on necessarily, now usually it works kind of hand in hand, but the best player or this player or that player, but the player that has influence on that team, if you can get them to go and buy in and be a living core proxy of who you are and what you want the team to be about, then good things happen. Then the rest will follow.
Coach Meyer used to say that you can pick your captains, but you can't pick your leaders.
Exactly right. And you see that in the military too. And because leadership is a behavior, not a title. And when things get dynamic and dangerous or difficult and adverse on the court or field, then kids start stepping up, and they're the ones others follow, the ones that dig in and have grit and treat the other ones properly. In the corporate world, the decentralization is a little bit different for all those reasons that I mentioned earlier. But let's say you have a franchise, right? Because you will see well-intended and some very popular social media influencer type Navy SEALs come out and just preach decentralization, decentralization, decentralization. But we have to stop and look at those elements, right? We had, as I said, all of those things. We could cross-train, we could whatever. So let's say you have a franchise where what are you looking for? You're looking for consistency of experience. And if you introduce, you're really relying a lot on systems and automation to produce that consistency. If you're introducing the human element, you're introducing more room for error or inconsistency. So it all depends on what kind of service and product are you providing? How many employees do you have? What is the realistic boundary, or what are the realistic boundaries on left and right in terms of how much you can decentralize and empower leaders? Because if you're going to empower people, they also need to be trained and have the resources that they need to be able to handle that. And some people may really appreciate it. There was a young man on a deployment once who was kind of driving me crazy. Always asking, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And he was kind of like me. He thrived on affirmation from a peer. And so I gave him a bunch of work to do, and he loved it. He felt very valued that way. But if you take a one size fits all model to that and okay, well, hey, here's a bunch of work for this person to do. And they're like, that's not really within the scope of our agreement. Why am I having all this extra work without the compensation that follows? So understanding the individual and and what motivates them, what they're looking for, so on and so forth. But I'm not one of these where it's like, hey, take the SEAL team model of decentralization and plug it into every other situation of leadership because that's how we did it. There are many more things to consider. And as you empower, you're assuming more risk. So all of those elements need to be there. Whereas the college example, self motivated individuals all want to be there, all want to compete, win a national title. It's not the same in the corporate world. Am I empowering a minimum wage worker who shows up late constantly and doesn't really want to be there, but that's all I can afford? Why? Right.
So it's much more of an adaptive versus adopt with leadership principles at that point. I mean, you have to figure out what your situation is and adapt to that.
Yeah, I think so, particularly in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me. You mentioned before. I was going again through notes. You had them listed as defeaters, and you said distraction, others' beliefs, and failure. Can you? Those have always stood out to me because distraction is a huge one right now for a lot of reasons. And along with distraction, to me, was almost others' beliefs because they almost go hand in hand at times with maybe where we're getting value, where our value are from. Can you talk about those three principles?
Yes. So what did you say it was?
Distraction, others' beliefs, and failure. You said would act as defeaters for us.
So if we talk about others' beliefs, I think where I have that now in the curriculum, because it's really expanded and been enhanced since we last spoke. But we talk about it in confidence. Confidence is certainty. Certainty comes from where we place our trust or what we value most. And we have a tendency naturally as human beings to place too much value in what other people think. And I believe that everyone is born with the ability to accomplish something great and there's purpose to everyone's life. And you don't need anybody's permission to honor that, just the courage to try. So we never want to become imprisoned by the opinions of other people. We just want to find an excuse to win, another SEAL team saying, because that's your purpose. And if it's meaningful enough, you just need one and it'll drive you forward. And there's other elements of confidence too that I could talk about for, say, an hour. But here's the other thing: when we say don't worry about what anybody thinks, it's really not quite that simple because we are social creatures. If I could put you on an island with every luxury known to man, anything you wanted, but not another human being to share it with for the rest of your life, nobody would take the deal. We need human interaction. We need a place to be vulnerable and a source to receive that affirmation and validation from. So, what I tell players and elite competitors is place your value in those who love you for who you are, not what you do. And keep that circle really, really small. Only people who have earned it. An example, if we go back to Tyler Matzek, he was drafted in the first round, phenom, straight up into the big leagues for the most part. So his train is cruising. Social media is being invented and coming around at that time. More people are wanting to hop on the train and be a part of what he's doing because a lot of them never got in the arena themselves. And then the train crashes. It hits a wall. He gets the yips. He can't throw. He's released from baseball. I said, who stayed on the train? Most people got off and they went looking for the next shiny thing to attach themselves to try to serve their own ego. But some people stayed on the train. Who was it? That's who you put in that circle. And that's who you can go to when you need a place to be vulnerable and a source for affirmation.
You've done some work, I know, on the PGA Tour as well as Major League Baseball. Um, two different things. Baseball is also there's a single aspect to it. The you don't rely on another teammate to hit a ball type deal with it. Golfer is much more opportunity to be self-centered, to have that anxiety because I saw you talk about definition of anxiety. It usually comes out of concern of our own performance. As a PGA golfer or a major league pitcher, it is your performance that dictates a lot. You talk about your work with that versus almost a team model.
Sure. A lot of the baseball players and a lot of the PGA Tour players that I get are centered on the yips, which is more of a nervous system issue. And if you're interested in that, you can go to yipsfree.com and check that out. And I've written a bunch and there's videos and podcasts on that because it's a different thing. But we also work on more of the traditional side of mindset. In particular, I got the opportunity to go speak to the Atlanta Braves in spring training, which was amazing because it was my childhood favorite team and it was really cool. And we're not talking about the Yips or anything like that when it's in a team setting. So the when it comes to the individual and having less of a team setting, because even there, it's like they want to buy in and win the World Series, and there is a big team aspect to the good big league teams. But at the end of the day, particularly in spring training, they're competing against each other for a job with pretty severe consequences when it comes to financial resources as to where they get placed in that group, right? So I talked to them a lot. It's like, okay, well, it is the anxiety comes out of self concern because we are survival, fear based creatures by nature, and if I get nervous before a combat operation, it's for my own life and death. So if I defer that concern to well-being of teammate and mission, it starts to go away. So how do we do that when there isn't a group? But there's always something deeper meaning. There's always a supporting cast of some sort, and there just something more meaningful than success, such as for love of the game. Just for pure love of the game could be proper. The better I am at this game, particularly when you're at the top, because once you reach the top professional level of something, there is no higher level to look up to for resources and information. Any kind of better way that has come up to do something is through your own innovation because you're the pro, right? And thinking, okay, well, the better I get at this, the better the game becomes itself, whatever it may be. But finding something that's more meaningful that drives you forward than just what happens to me. But again, when it comes to trust the process and things like that, I'm very careful because I think that it's used way too often and out of context. It just gets thrown around out there, um, and there's this almost sort of like apathetic approach where it doesn't matter, such as surrender the outcome. I hate that phrase because and I get deep with my thoughts and maybe it's too much, but like if you and I are going to compete against each other, the outcome hasn't occurred. So you don't own it and I don't own it. I'm not going to surrender it and just kind of not care what happens. I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to fight hard for it through what I do today.
Well, I've got a friend that says that the results, your process is giving you the result. You're perfectly designed to get the results that you're getting right now because whatever you're doing is leading to those results. And I would think if you don't like the outcome to something, rather than just getting, yeah, I can hate to lose, but in order to not lose it the next time, I need to go back and work on that process to get there. To me, that's different than just saying, oh, well, we'll go out tomorrow and do the same thing and get the same result.
Right. And also understanding, because I heard somebody say, a big influencer one time, that everything that happens to you is your fault. Take ownership of it. And I understand the mentality and the point that he was trying to make, but really we can't control very much of what happens to us. So not everything that happens to us is our fault. Some people experience a lot more adversity than others or at different times or particular times, but the way we respond to everything is our responsibility. And so taking a look at, okay, what are the external influencing factors here? And then, yes, what do I need to do to be able to overcome those same conditions? Right. Versus like, okay, well, I just didn't get it. So whatever. Right. And putting a little depth into that.
And back to identifying controllables. What are the things that I certainly can control and letting go of the ones that are outside of that? Two more.
Exactly.
Well, one that's hit me over and over. We're talking about coaches and corporate leaders and where you find your value and those things. But to me, the thing keeps coming back. I've got my oldest son is out of college. My youngest son's a freshman in high school. But really thinking about the challenge as a parent to teach those values to them and not do the opposite of placing where they're thinking their value from me is because they can hit a ball or kick a ball or tackle a guy or whatever. And I was just thinking about how much what you're talking about is more important to parents than coaches because that's our job. Have you seen that with your own kids?
Yeah. It's hard. My kids don't want to sit down with me and work through the curriculum like other people hire me to do. And I do work with teenagers and college aged kids, and it's a lot of fun. We sit down, we do Zoom calls for an hour, and we work through one thing at a time: resilience, courage, confidence, leadership, communication, how to fail, how to never quit. But what I do is I insert it naturally into conversations when we have them about life stuff or after a game if they want to talk. A big league baseball player who I coach youth baseball now, and he owns the organization. And some advice that he gave us is on the car ride home, if our son wants to talk, he asks him, he says, "Do you want to talk to dad or do you want to talk to coach?" And learning the differences between, I have 3 kids that are all competitive right now, and they're 16, 13, and 10, so they're at different ages. And one thing I learned with my son was, and he was in a pretty difficult environment. I That's part of the reason I got into coaching, was because I was seeing kids at 7 and 8 years old get left behind simply because they're not excelling at a very young age and getting yelled at and screamed at and shamed. Not all the time, every time, but things where I would see some things happen sometimes where I'm like, if we were in a grocery store, people would intervene, but it's okay because we're on a new football field to scream at a child this way who's trying to learn how to play a very difficult game. Anyways, to the point, I was having a tough time helping him and I what I learned with him was to ask him questions. Instead of telling him what to do, ask him what he thought he needed to do, and then you can guide and sort of steer that conversation the right way as far as it goes fundamentally and how he's swinging the bat or doing whatever. But with the intangibles, it's rough out there. There's a lot of pressure being placed on kids. Everything is much more overt. Everything's recorded. You go out and you have a bad day today, it's on Instagram and YouTube and everything else, where in our era, you go out and have a bad day, and the only people who know are the locals around here who were at the game and maybe the newspaper, and nobody remembers a week later. It's out
As
there.
opposed to being on a loop somewhere. Absolutely. Got 2 more questions right here. One, we're talking about tough situations a lot of times. As a coach at any level, whether you're going to be a new middle school coach, high school, college, professional, I don't know the percentage, but we'll say a high most of the time you're going into a situation that's not the ideal one, because there's usually been a transition because there was an issue, there was a conflict, or there was some sort of performance issue or goal that wasn't met. What advice would you give for that new coach going into those situations right away to try to address some of these things that we've just talked about?
Well, if we go back to the very first thing you said in the Steel Creed, it's my ability to control my thought and action, regardless of circumstance, that sets me apart from other men. If we break that down in a way that I probably could have articulated better at the beginning, is that skill, we have to have it. Okay, it's important. We need natural talent, and then to develop the skill on top of that. That's number one. If we're not good at what we do, we're going to struggle. But that's only going to take you so far. It's going to take you as far as it will take you. So to really gain the advantage and then be able to beat teams and separate yourself from teams that have the same level of skill or more skill. So I tell the players a lot, particularly when they're feeling the pressure at the higher levels, is, the gap between the best and the worst player in high school is like this. In college, it's like this, and in pro, it's very, very minimal. So what are those separating factors? Well, that can come through in mindset and then in culture. I call culture how we interact, right? So if we think about it, performance is an ability to execute fundamentals under stress. Fundamentals being the controllable actions of value. But those fundamentals are not only in how we do what we do, but also in how we think and interact with each other. So you got to establish the culture, set a clear set of core values. The 3 things, this is what this is
Right.
going to be about, and it's what you're going to live. And here's our mission. And these 3 things, showing up and living these every day, is what's going to produce this. And then find a meaningful purpose that is collective, that everyone can buy into. We are going to put this team on the map, and we're going to let everybody know who we are, or something of the sort. That way they have a rally cry that they can all rally behind and push forward into, and remind them of it, and print it out, put it in the dugout or wherever. But also, not getting so, because I think there's people get so far into the mindset, and then we conflate mental health with mental performance. Breathe, meditate, all this stuff and whatever. There comes a time when it's like, hey, you just got to have grit and respond. You got to put the emotions away, and you got to compete right now, whatever it is, or lean into them and allow them to motivate you. But not getting, so it's not like we can just sit there and zen out and meditate our way to success, right? But putting some time and attention to the mindset and developing a culture. If you build trust, if they trust you and the players trust each other, you're going to enhance their ability to apply their natural talent and the skills you develop on top of it.
And it seems like, and for me, even me personally, one of the biggest mistakes that we make as coaches, especially going into a new job or in a transition, is you start the other way. We start with a disproportionate amount of time on the skill part, which we know is limited as what it is, and then think on the back end we'll get to the intangibles, and they're not one or the other, and I think a lot of times we try to separate those on the back end.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's planning it with the appropriate balance because in high school, you have a certain amount of time you can practice, and the NCAA has restrictions too. No, it's a lot of time. You're out there a lot, particularly in college. You know, you're out there for hours a day, every day, and then in pro, you have kind of unlimited time. But plan it out. This is how the amount of time I'm going to put into this and into that, and um, developing it developing it that way because it is hard and the skill sets have to be there, not only individual, but you have a lot of situational stuff to work on. They've got to know the playbook and all the different, our half court press or full court press and how we're going to defeat each, and same on the baseball field and whatever. And that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort, and it's hard to set aside that time to focus on these intangible things, but you can work them into practice also. I'll sometimes, once my material has been introduced, is I'll tell the coach, why don't you have one of your captains or a different player every day pick out one of these things we've talked about to be the intention for that day. Today we're going to be really mentally tough at practice, and then have that player break down how we think the team did applying that at practice. So it's at least being mentioned, and an intention is at least being inserted. So it's on their mind, right?
Soft rain approach rather than just gushing them with water all at one time.
Yeah, and it's hard, Greg, too, like with talent, and sometimes depending on the age of the kid, maybe you want to try to bring them around. But if you look at Hell Week, that we had the biggest, fastest, strongest, most one of the most physically capable people I have ever met in my entire life in my buds class, but he was a jerk. As soon as things got hard, a little too bloody, cold, and mean, he would duck boat, not carry his weight, blame his teammates. And on Monday morning of Hell Week, I watched Hell Week do its job, and he cried and he quit. And we were all happy to see him go because even though he provided us a lot of value when things were comfortable for him, as soon as they got uncomfortable, he broke down because he's more concerned about himself and his own comfort and well-being than he is the greater purpose and mission. And he didn't have that understanding that serving that would actually have helped him and probably allowed him to graduate and become a Navy SEAL. And hopefully he's learned that lesson. But it's the same in sports. We see that player who's that way, all the talent in the world, but can't compete when the first thing goes wrong. It's they shut down, they get kicked out of the game, whatever it may be. And so you got to find, okay, what am I willing to accept and try to make a transition on? And at what point is it a lost cause? Because that will bleed into the rest of the team and it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I've been guilty of that on both sides of it. Yeah, absolutely. Last question right here, and we try to end the session with, if you could give one lesson from the sideline, if you were letting go and just one lesson you could give from the sideline, what would it be?
From the sideline to like just in general?
Yep.
Oh, man, that is a good question. I would say have faith, have conviction that when we look at one of the things with confidence that we always talk about, preparation breeds confidence. It does. Having the right people, starting with the right people, breeds confidence, and trust in your teammates breed confidence. But it really comes down to this: is the outcome is uncertain. I'm going to start the business. We're going to merge and take this risk in the corporate world. We're going to compete in this big game. Well, where a lot of the fear or apprehensiveness comes from is we don't know what's going to happen. The outcome is uncertain, which begs the question, how do we have certainty in an uncertain outcome? And I didn't know the answer to that for a while. And the one that I've come up with is we can't be certain what the outcome will be, but we can be certain that there's purpose to every outcome, that short-term failures are necessary to produce long-term success. And that takes an element of faith. But here's the other thing I've learned through the course of my life and the difficult experiences that I've had. It's not blind faith. It's by clear observation of life. And any athlete that you admire, or leader or person or hero type of person that you admire, it's not usually because everything was easy and they just cruised to the top ranks. It's usually because they overcame some great setback in their life. And does everything happen for a reason? I don't know. I don't think so, because I think things happen that are outside God's will, but I believe that it depends on how you want to look at it. But I believe that we are equipped, that we won't experience anything, and God will give us the ability to overcome it. We have the tools and resources. If we seek, we'll find. And so just have conviction that no matter how hard or painful it may be, there's purpose to it, and a greater response to our pain assigns greater meaning to it. And that's what creates fulfillment. And fulfillment is what we're all really looking for.
Right.